Every organization says they have a culture. But what happens when that culture starts feeling less like a set of shared values and more like a belief system people are expected to follow? No questions asked. How do you know if you're working in a healthy environment or in a system that quietly demands your loyalty, your conformity, and your silence? And here's the real question. How does that environment affect your growth as a leader, as a follower, and as a human being? Today, we're breaking all of that down. Welcome back to Built to Grow, the podcast where we explore the mindsets, strategies, and skills that help you become the strongest, most effective version of yourself. I'm your host, Valdet Salima, and today we're diving into a topic that most teams and leaders feel, but don't always have the words to articulate or to describe. Organizational culture. So we're going to talk about what it is, why it exists, when it becomes harmful, and how it shapes both leadership and followership in an organization. So listen, whether you're leading a team, you're part of a team, or you're building one from scratch, this episode will give you the clarity that you need to recognize healthy culture and the confidence to address unhealthy ones. But first, we have to start with, well, what is organizational culture? So let's just start at the foundation. Culture is how you do things. So culture in an organization is how you do things. And it's often described as the personality of the organization. And when we go deeper into that, organizational culture is the shared operating system of a company. So it's not the perks, it's not the posters, it's not the motivational quotes in the hallway. Culture can also be looked at or defined as what gets rewarded in the organization, what gets tolerated, what gets corrected, and what gets ignored. Culture is the behavior that a company reinforces consistently on its best days and its worst days. So when people say, this is just the way things have been done around here, or that's how things are done around here, that's culture. That's the personality of the organization. But my question for you is, let's pause. Who exactly is responsible for organizational culture? Who does the onus fall on to create organizational culture? If you said leadership, you're correct. A leader's number one responsibility is to create and embody the culture, because leaders have something that followers don't when it comes to culture: power. They have the ability to influence policies, procedures, thinking patterns, behavioral patterns, emotional patterns through their titled power as leaders. Followers, team members don't share that same power. But look, whether you lead or follow, your success in the company is deeply influenced by those spoken or unspoken rules. So let's talk about, well, why does organizational culture exist in the first place? But first, before we answer that question, there's another question I'd like to ask that we need to answer first. What's the purpose of an organization? Like, why does an organization exist? Profit. The end goal at the end of the day for any company, any organization, any business is to make profit, to make money. That is the end goal of any business. Culture exists for one very simple reason: to help people work together effectively. But we have to look at the history of this first. When we look at the history of the workforce, so when we look at around the time of the Industrial Revolution, when we look at, jobs like factory jobs and all these blue collar jobs, any collar job actually, the environment, the culture of companies was the boss says work, you work. The boss says you have to get this done, you get it done. You don't question the boss, you do as you're told. And that was organizational culture for a very long time. And Karl Marx has a lot of great thoughts on this too, which I appreciate. But one of the things that when you look at workers, because Karl Marx believed that eventually the workers would uprise because they were being exploited by the 1%, by the wealthy. Well, that started to happen because then people started to disengage because they were constantly being told what to do. They were constantly being told, you have to do this, you have to do that. But they didn't find meaning in their work. They had needs and wants that were not being met. They were being exploited and they knew it. And so people started to disengage. People started to work less, produce less. And that got the attention of those that were in power. And so those in power, to get people to work, to create the product, to provide the service, adopted the company culture to incorporate more of what people wanted and needed to find meaningful work, to take care of some, basic needs. This was all part of getting people to work to do the jobs. Culture was designed for that. And there's different types of company cultures. There's some democratic, but at the end of the day, they all serve the same purpose: to get people to work and to work effectively. And go deeper into that, organizations build culture so they can do a couple of things. One, align behavior. When people know what matters most and how to act, so that people know exactly what they're supposed to be doing and how to do it. So it aligns behavior. It also, in that same realm, helps reduce confusion. So clear norms, clear expectations reduce unnecessary conflict. 3, it also creates what teams look for, and that's predictability. Teams know what to expect from one another, so they know how to engage with one another. That leads to a little bit more cohesion. It also helps to improve performance. So when you have shared expectations, you will see improved results. When the expectations, the goals are explicitly laid out, you will see performance. What most people will rise up to reach those expectations, which then leads to better performance and better performance ratings. Organizational culture also helps support the company's goals. Culture keeps everyone focused on the same direction. Everyone's moving forward together. So culture is a strategy. It's a tool. It's also a guide. And when it's used well, it can create high trust amongst teams, amongst the organization, amongst leaders. It can create high clarity, reduce confusion, and you will see high performance. You will see people start to tap even into their own potential. But it can also be misused. And when it's misused, it creates fear, it creates silence, and it leads to high disengagement. So let's talk about when culture becomes misused. Because here's the important part for our growth, right? Culture in an organization can drift from healthy to unhealthy without a single person noticing, without anyone noticing at first. Because here's the thing, it doesn't happen overnight. Cultural deterioration happens slowly, it happens quietly, and it happens layer by layer in the organization. So let's talk about some signs that culture is being misused. And this isn't to shame organizations, but this is to help you recognize some red flags early on before the culture really starts to nosedive. Okay, so misuse number 1, this is some of the most common things that I have seen in my experience. Culture equals conformity. Healthy culture encourages uniqueness. Unhealthy culture expects people to fit in or be a culture fit, even if that means hiding parts of themselves. When the message becomes be like us, think like us, act like us, which is all culture fit, growth stops, innovation stops, psychological safety disappears. And Dr. Amy Edmondson did a lot of work in the field of psychological safety, and Google also did some research on this, but Google found that the number one contributor to cohesive teams is psychological safety. And psychological safety is feeling safe to speak up, to share an idea, to be yourself, to be authentic, to challenge somebody else without fear of consequence, retaliation, or retribution. When a culture is unhealthy, psychological safety is the first thing to go. It disappears. Okay, misuse number 2. Questioning becomes discouraged. Look, strong teams know how to challenge each other respectfully. They engage in spirited conflict. They will challenge ideas. And great leaders invite that challenge, and great leaders invite being questioned. But unhealthy cultures makes questioning feel risky because there's no psychological safety. People start self-censoring. You will start to see that they'll avoid speaking up, and they don't share ideas that could improve the team or the organization. And often you can tell when the ones who were saying something no longer are speaking up. This is where creativity and engagement begin to fade away. You will see your highest performers become mid performers. They won't engage, they won't ask questions, they won't challenge. Your mid performers might become low performers, and any level, low, medium, or high performers will eventually leave the organization because of the culture. They can do the work anywhere. It's the culture of the organization that they leave, which also goes into one I've seen a lot. Culture is used to justify overworking people. Look, I've talked about this numerous times. I'm sure you've heard this before. Things like, we're a family here. We hustle hard. We play hard and we work hard. We do whatever it takes. Blah, 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 blah. Look, so sometimes that inspires people. It does. And I can appreciate that. But a lot of times it can also be used to pressure people into very unhealthy working patterns. They will work late, skipping breaks, ignoring burnout, prioritizing work over well-being. There's this concept called schedule creep, where people allow their work life to creep into their personal lives, and they start to prioritize their work over themselves. I actually worked at a company once where, meetings get scheduled at all times of the day, including the lunch hour. And I just gave the idea. I said, why don't we all, as an organization, to help, with mental health and just getting people, breaks and giving them a moment. What if we blocked off lunch as a non-meeting hour, like 12 to, or set like a time where we don't schedule meetings? And I was met with, well, every second counts. So we have to meet when we meet because we have stuff that we have to do. And I was like, that's burnout. It's burnout. Yikes. Because here's the thing. A really healthy culture promotes performance, not exhaustion. Unhealthy cultures not only promote exhaustion, they actually reward exhaustion. The ones who are willing to burn themselves out are often the ones that get promoted. And those leaders are then expected to work the same way that they did, that got them promoted. And they're in a constant state of burnout and overworking because that's now the new expectation. That's an unhealthy culture. And unhealthy culture impacts leadership, which we'll talk about today too. But another misuse, number 4, is that culture is a shield for problematic behavior. When you have someone in the organization who consistently acts in a way that harms the team, but leadership excuses it because that person fits the culture becomes a shield. And a lot of times it becomes a weapon. Healthy cultures have one standard for everyone, including leadership. Another misuse is culture is used as a veil. This is when culture becomes more of a slogan than a practice. This is performative culture. Like the values sound amazing on paper, but the lived experience doesn't match. I remember I worked at a coworker, and she left our organization, and she said something to me that I never thought of until she said it. But she said, all the values that we talk about are just really, they are addressing everything that's wrong with the company. And it was the first time I ever thought of like, oh yeah, we say all these things, but I don't know that the experience matches the values. Think about that for a second, because when culture becomes a performance instead of a practice, trust erodes, engagement drops, people disconnect. Before we move on to how culture shapes your experience in an organization, I just want to take a moment to talk about something important. If you're listening to this episode and thinking, wow, some of those issues sound familiar, or our team is struggling with culture clarity, with accountability and communication, this is exactly the kind of work that I do through DEVCORE Consulting. DEVCORE is my talent development and organizational growth practice where I help leaders and teams do things like develop healthy and intentional culture, strengthen accountability without fear. I help you improve communication, and I help you build cohesive, high-performing teams. And I also help you grow leadership capacity at every level. So whether you need personal development, personal coaching, team training, leadership coaching, or a full culture design process, DEVCORE gives you the frameworks, the guidance, and the strategies that deliver results. If your organization is ready to grow, or you want to become a stronger leader yourself, you can learn more at devcoreconsulting.com, or you can email me directly at valdet@devcoreconsulting.com. All right, let's get back into the episode. So let's talk about how culture shapes leadership. Look, whether you're a manager or not, you need to understand this. Culture is one of the biggest forces shaping leadership behavior. In a healthy culture, here are some behaviors to consider. Leaders listen. Leaders know how to communicate a message clearly and make sure that it is understood. Leaders welcome feedback. They admit mistakes. They grow openly. They share what they're working on. They share progress and setbacks. And overall, they prioritize their people because they know that their people are the most important part of the organization. Nothing happens without people. Leaders in these cultures, they don't need power plays. They don't need to intimidate. They don't need to be, nor do they want to be, the smartest person in the room. The culture itself supports leadership success. Now, the other way, when you look at unhealthy cultures, in an unhealthy culture, leaders are way more guarded. They are only looking out for themselves. They become reactive. They avoid feedback. They micromanage, and micromanage is tied to trust issues. They fear conflict, and they prioritize control. And it's often because their own leaders, so the leader of the leaders and the senior leaders, have created an unhealthy environment for them. And these behaviors, like I said, they're not always the leader, because I do a lot of leadership development, and I do a lot of different psychometric assessments and coaching. And there are some things that are inherent from a personal perspective. You know, I have my light, my dark, I have my strengths, my weaknesses. But these behaviors aren't always internal. They're often the symptom of the culture around them. I mean, if you look at the history of like Microsoft or Activision, those two had notoriously unhealthy, untoxic workplace cultures that led to leadership behaviors that were equally as toxic. So the culture often determines and can influence healthy or unhealthy leadership behaviors. I share this with you because understanding this can help you grow your compassion, but also gain clarity. But it's not just leaders. We also have to flip the script. We also have to talk about followers, because when we have leaders, we also have followership. And there's different types of followers. We have some very engaged followers who are like peer leaders who challenge the status quo. But we have some people who are just do what they're told. But culture shapes how people follow. And in healthy cultures, people who are exemplary followers, they speak up, they contribute new ideas, they trust their leaders, they feel valued, they take initiative, they feel seen, their strengths are leveraged, they grow. This is a type of followership that a healthy culture creates. But when you have an unhealthy culture, people are passive followers. They go silent, they step back, they don't want to engage, they will actively even disengage, they avoid any risks, they will only do the bare minimum. So whatever they're required to do, just enough to not get in trouble, that's what they'll do. They will do everything to try and stay invisible in an organization that has a very unhealthy culture. And I want to be clear, this isn't about good or bad employees. Those are moral judgments. It's not about good or bad. It's about how the environment that employees are in shapes their behavior. If people are silent, it's usually not because they have nothing to say. They do. Most people have something to say. It's because they don't feel safe saying it. So, Culture or cult? I want to ask some questions. I just want you to reflect on these questions, whether you're a leader or a team member, just to help you understand your culture more deeply. So I want you to ask yourself, I'm going to ask these questions. I just want you to reflect on them. So here we go. Can people disagree safely in your organization, regardless of title? Can people disagree safely? Does the culture encourage individuality or conformity? Do leaders welcome questions? Is feedback valued or avoided? Are the stated values practiced consistently? Is psychological safety present? Are boundaries respected? Do people feel comfortable being authentic? Does the culture support growth or limit it? Look, if you notice any gaps, that's not necessarily a failure. It is an opportunity. Healthy cultures by far are not perfect, but they are committed to growth, just like we are here on this podcast. So here's the takeaway for you. Culture should help people grow. It should strengthen communication, trust, and it should help increase performance. It should create environments where both the leaders and the followers thrive. And when culture becomes rigid, controlling, or fear-based, growth stops, engagement dies. But the beautiful thing is this: culture is not fixed. It can evolve, it can be rebuilt, and it can be strengthened. And if you're someone committed to being built to grow, you have the power to shape the culture around you by modeling clarity, authenticity, accountability, and compassion. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If this gave you insight or clarity, share it with someone who needs it or a leader who is ready to elevate their culture. I'm Veldet Salimai, and you're listening to Built to Grow, the podcast that helps you develop the mindset and tools to become your strongest self. I'll see you in the next episode.